what makes us different. That's the thing that I've found over time, that even with some of the most successful brands, if they can't answer that question really well, they're never going to make it to that place, that promised land of being a real standout and leader in their space.
Yeah.
I think that a brand is not just the personality of a founder. They don't translate exactly. You'll hear founders talk about their company often that this is my baby. The responsibility of a parent, you don't want to make like an exact clone of yourself. Of course not.
When do you know it's time for you to rebrand?
I like to use the word refresh, because rebrand, when people hear that, they just think, oh, it's a tear down. You got to like throw everything out. The reality is what really is needed is a refresh.
Yeah. What do you tell to those brands who are really struggling to thrive in this attention economy? The
key to success, I think, for brands these days are the ones that have enough flexibility built in.
Yeah. As a founder, what are some of the first questions they should be asking before joining this rat's race?
That's another great question. I think
Pash, it's so nice to have you on the pod. I think you have shaped the brand identities of some of the iconic names in media. I think Playboy, ABC, Disney, Apple TV Plus, and you're doing so many different things now. The first question that comes to my mind is, do you create from intuition or is it iteration? What's the creative process like?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, for each of those, I think there was a different role. Some of them were, there's many projects and many clients that I've had in a really long career. I feel like I've been blessed to work on a ton of really amazing things. Some of those I had a bigger hand in than others. A lot of times it was just coming in and getting to work for a small moment on a really particular interesting thing that somebody is doing. So, but then there were others that I did have a much heavier hand in and was really guiding and overseeing almost everything that was happening from a design and a brand standpoint. And I think that it really depends. Sometimes, in many, if not most cases, I'm working with something that already exists and trying to figure out where that brand goes next, how we do something that introduces a new layer or a different slight pivot to what the brand is existing that's already doing. And I love doing that because I'm building on a legacy of something that's already been happening or that's already out there in the world that is put itself into consumers' minds in some way, and trying to figure out where's the right place to take it from here. How are we going to tap into what's working really well, and how are we going to adjust for the things that maybe are not working as strongly, which is often, if not maybe most of the time, why somebody comes to me to work with them in the first place. And then when you're starting something brand new, that's where the iteration is so essential, because you're having to create something that has never existed. You're having to create, just plant a little seed and then give it water and sunlight and watch it develop and grow. But you have to do a lot of the legwork out the gate. And what I've found, I think, in time is that you're always most successful if you're tapping into something that consumers or whoever is, the audience is going to be taking it in and it resonates with them in some way. So it's harder to do when you're working with a brand that's been in the world for a long time. That's easy to do. People already have an opinion and an experience and a feeling that they get when they look at or think about that brand. But when it's something that's brand new, you have to create that. So I've enjoyed having a balance of both of those things. Even now I'm working with a couple of things that are out in the world that already exist, that have been there a very, very long time. There's a couple of things I'm working on that are out in the world that are doing incredibly successful, but they're still in almost a startup phase, and they're trying to figure out how they're really going to cement themselves into people's minds. And I'm working on a project that's completely brand new that nobody's ever heard of at all. And for each of those, it's a little bit of a different approach.
And I think what it means to be a brand has also shifted. Back in the day, you probably had a brand book, you have mission, vision, and a bunch of values. And then there's some colors that you have to use, just like guidance on the fonts and whatnot. But today, a brand has to be in so many different channels. Each channel comes with some expectation of how you need to show up and how stories need to be told. So there's this inherent race to the bottom where everybody is trying to do something to stay relevant, but the brand gets diluted. So as a founder who is building something new today, what are some of the first questions they should be asking before joining this rat's race?
That's another great question. I think the stuff that you mentioned there in the beginning of that is the foundation still. And that's where it has to start. It's really the main questions that you originally must ask is who are we and what do we stand for? Like that's kind of first and foremost. That's the table stakes. But equally as important that comes right on the heels of that is what makes us different. That's the thing that I've found over time, that even with some of the most successful brands, if they can't answer that question really well and definitively, then they're just not going to they're never going to make it to that place, that promised land of being a real standout and leader in their space. So that to me is critical. Those are the most important things. But that brand book of that you're talking about, really like a brand strategy that everybody's on the same page with, who we are, like I said, what we stand for, knowing your audience, all those things are critically important. And then you have to, a really well executed brand strategy takes several of those things and then finds a way to sort of tie that up into almost like a little statement. And I don't like really using mission statements per se. I'm more about a company really understanding their purpose, which is why they're in business besides making money. And then a vision. When you use that term, and I love that one. That is really a picture of the future that everybody who works at this brand can set their sights on. But if you have those things and you've figured out a way to do it where the founder is really understanding of what that is and gets it, understands who their audience, what they're going after, what makes them special, what makes them different, how they're going to, what their approach is going to be in terms of finding their place in the world of all these brands. Once they have that, if the founder has it, then that can make its way down through their executive team and down the way through everybody who works at the company. Because that's the goal, is that everybody there can speak to those things. So once they have that, then what happens is at every level, everyone, they sort of iterate and they ideate and they experiment and they bring their own unique things as a person, as a human, to that brand, but they are all able to stay within, stay the course and do things that are on brand. That quote, that phrase that we hear used all the time. So partnered with that becomes some visual and some design related things, like you said, a color palette, typography, hero elements, a logo, other graphics and things that are involved. And those of course are necessary too. And there's a reason they get done at the beginning. They're foundational as well.
Yeah, I guess this comes up a lot because brand designers come up and set certain visual language. And oftentimes it does feel like set in stone because today, when a brand has to show up in so many different places, what people think is cool changes every minute. And oftentimes what you set in stone is not matching up to that. Mm-hmm. So what do you tell to those brands who are really struggling to thrive in this attention economy? What happens to those brand guidelines?
So I think you nailed it exactly. The key to success, I think, for brands these days are the ones that have enough flexibility built in. And that can still be part of the guidelines. The ones that have flexibility and understand how far they can kind of push this way or that way and still stay right on brand. In other words, the materials that they're making, the things that they're putting out into all these various areas and forms of media. Like to your point, there's just so many more places that brands live now and that people are experiencing them. As long as they can put things out there that feel like they're coming from the same place, that feel like they're coming from the same voice, then that's what it means to be on brand. That's how they win. So, but you're right. It's easy to say. It doesn't come inherently, easy, or it's not something that just comes natural to absolutely everybody. There's people that are great at thinking in that way. They're the ones that are, from a design standpoint or from a strategy standpoint, are able to really be successful in the brand space. But it's not for everybody. A lot of people can't do that. Now, I believe that constraints they're actually very helpful. And they're the kind of things that designers in general and strategic, people that are driving strategy, whether it's advertising, marketing strategy, whatever, or even business strategy, at that C-suite level. The people that understand that constraints are actually helpful. The guidelines are there just to help you focus. but there's so much room that you have to still work within that. You can never think of guidelines as just, well, these are these rules and I can't fucking break them. I mean, rules are made to be broken. The great brands do break rules once in a while. There's certain things that you never want to break, but there's others that you do. And that's what I mean by having the flexibility to push a little bit this way, a little bit that way. The voice that a brand uses in social is going to be a little bit different than the voice that they use in their, if they're doing, sort of mass market advertising. And it's going to be different than the voice that they use when they're functioning from a B2B standpoint.
Yeah.
But it's still got to be that same voice.
Yeah, yeah. Let's dig into a little bit of like your past experience because it's super interesting. You were very early to Apple TV, kind of helped define their brand, scale it. I'm just a consumer, watch a ton of Apple TV shows. Where is your work showing up? What exactly happened on day zero? What kind of things did you do? What does it mean to actually build that Apple TV brand?
That was, it's just that I've such fondness for that chapter in my life. I worked there almost 6 years and I just loved every minute of it. And yet it was the hardest job I ever had by a mile. Part of probably why I did love it so much. And it was a really hard decision for me when I decided I wanted to make a life pivot and move away. And maybe we'll talk a little bit about why I made that decision, maybe not. But I think to your question, first of all, unfortunately, there's not a lot I can get into that's like super detailed about the work that I do at Apple. I definitely respect the fact that I agreed to not talk about that. They're very careful and thoughtful and protective of the specifics of how they do the work there. But I can certainly speak in general terms about a lot of it. And the first, job that I saw myself as having when I came there was to answer the question really of what would Apple do? They were going into a space that they had not really been in before. They'd been pretty heavily in the music world, obviously, for years, and had changed everything really a lot, and of how things shifted in the world of music. But in terms of filmed entertainment, television and film, they had not been in that space where they were creating original content and really taking a very, very bold and strong position in it. So I had to really ask how it would be done. And I think the reason that I appealed to the Apple people in general, the leadership there that came and sought me out, I wasn't looking for a job. They approached me. And the reason I think that I was desirable is that the work that I was doing, which was at the Walt Disney Company, working on the ABC brand at that time, I think they thought of, they looked at it and they said, this person's had an ability to, with his creative teams and the work that he's put out in the world, simplify things, streamline things, raise the level, and make things feel a little bit more elegant and a little bit more, they motivate and move people in a different kind of way. There's a much better and stronger emotional connection, I think they looked at with the work that I was doing. So it's probably what they said, maybe this guy could be like that. Now, it turns out I was an Apple brand loyalist, like a passionate brand loyalist for most of my, life, certainly all my adult life. But like from when Apple first showed up, I was in high school really and started first working with Apple products. But I mean, I'm talking about from the very first Apple computer that was geared towards designers. That was the first one I ever worked on. I got their first laptop. I got their first everything kind of. So definitely was a brand loyalist all the way through. But the other thing is that I always had just such tremendous admiration, as many people did, for the brand itself, for what that brand was. And it's almost nothing in the world could hold a candle to it. The way that they had gone out in the world and established and created this brand of who they are and what makes them special. And I knew that more than anything because of how I felt when I thought of the brand. And the Apple brand, I teach and I use this example with my students at the beginning of every quarter when I talk about brands and I try to illustrate and demonstrate for them, even graphic design students, and they come into a classroom with me and I'm talking about branding in my branding class, I try to help them understand from the get-go that they have to really reframe and rethink what a brand is and what a designer's role is to work on that. So to me, a brand is so much more than just, it's not, to your point you made earlier, it's not just a logo, it's not a set of colors, it's not just the slogans, it's not just, the rules about how you see typeset and all that stuff. It is the way that you feel when you think of a brand. And some brands are really simple and you think of them and there's like one very simple, straightforward thing that comes to mind, but it is cemented in your head and it's the only thing you think of. Like if I ask you to think of Tiffany, the company that makes the jewelry company, you close your eyes and imagine it, you're probably not thinking of the logo. You're probably not thinking of an actual item of jewelry. You're probably thinking of that little, box,
Yeah.
that little blue
Yeah.
box, like that. That's who they are. That's their such an important and key part of their brand identity, and that's what jumps to mind.
Yeah.
But if I
Yeah.
ask you to close your eyes and think of Apple, there's so many things. You may think of a product, you may think of a logo, you may think of an important figure like Steve Jobs. You may think of an incredible advertising campaign, one of many that has stayed in your mind, for much of your life. The Think Different campaign, the incredible iTunes campaign with the colors and the silhouettes, the Shot on iPhone campaign. I mean, the list just kind of goes on and on. So when I came to Apple, I knew and I felt that I have to figure out how what that language is. It's not just the voice. It's certainly not just the type or the color or the whatever. I took each of those examples, looked at all of them, and said, how do I guide the creation of the way that we are going to package and promote TV shows and films at this company in a way that feels like it doesn't completely and entirely abandon the way that the entertainment industry has always done everything, because there's a lot of sameness out there and it's a very crowded market space. But what would Apple's approach be? How would they do this in a way that is just different enough, that feels unique and feels special, and that if a billboard or whatever did not have a logo on it and somebody looked at it, they'd say to themselves, now that looks like an Apple show. That's what I had to ask myself.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what we set out to do from the very beginning. And that was really I being the first person in, that was what was day one. And honestly, day one through quite a few, a few months in. We didn't have a name of the service when I arrived yet. I didn't have a single team member yet. I had to build that team person by person. And I built an incredible team. And I'm, to this day, still so proud of almost every single one of them that I brought in. I interviewed every one of them. They're all still there, and they're doing incredible work to this day. But it was really about figuring out a mindset. And I again, without going into detail, but the things that I did, my first order of business really was creating and drafting and discussing it with the senior leaders that I worked for and with at that company first, to talk about what is that approach going to be? What are those things that we're going to do? Just speaking in generalities. I didn't jump in and go, okay, well, here's comp 1 and comp 2 and comp 3. I had to sit down and figure out how are we going to set the table. And that's the best way to make your way into any brand space first, is just take the time to set the table first.
Yeah. I guess probably this is a good question to ask, because a lot of startup founders, be it in tech or D2C or any of these adjacent areas, when they're starting new, a lot of your biggest problems are find product market fit. I think brand is very low on the list of things to do. But there comes an inflection point where you're suddenly growing, and you really have to communicate about who you are to the world, and you have to come across as a very serious business that can articulate everything you can do, what you can do, for who you can do. At that point in time, who should a founder work with? What kind of team should they build? How should they start defining their brand? Or when is the right time to define a brand?
That's such a good question also. And I think it's you're talking about and articulating a challenge that in a way almost every company goes through, but in this world and time that's very exciting from a business standpoint, where startups are new startups are coming along every day and figuring out their path. They all kind of approach it in a different way. There will be, if the founders are lucky enough to have come from a place or have a mentor or somebody that says, this is how I did it and it worked, then great. They might have a plan of how they're going to go about it. But what I found, my experience is that most of them don't. I've working with, as I told you, there's a couple of companies in particular that are startups that I'm working with. And it's fascinating to me, the similarities. They're not the same kind of company. They're not competing with each other. They're in two totally different spaces, but they are about the same age. They've been around for about the same amount of time, and they're both just taking off like a rocket ship, and they're incredible. But they have the same challenge that they're trying to address, and they're coming at it from two different places. One of them is very, very dialed in on exactly who they are from a brand standpoint, and they've gone through and checked every box on that understanding of who we are. Who is our audience? How are we going to go after it? They just don't know necessarily how to make that transition from being B2B to being B2C and figuring out what does that brand look like out in the world. And then I'd say a similar but different challenge with the other company is that the founder is like, you know, has just done an extraordinary job, is an absolute guru of being able to create a business, is thinking in such a unique and different, wonderful way. But brand is not that person's strong suit either. And they don't necessarily have every box checked on that, you know, on that positioning, you know, need that you have, that brief that you must really have. Again, like I said, to get everybody in the company on the same page. So I'm working with both of those companies in this capacity. Now, it's easy to think like, oh, that's simple. You just hire a senior level chief branding officer, and then they determine the best steps to go. Do you build a team in-house for this? Do you outsource to creative partners from both a strategy and design standpoint? Sometimes both, if you're working with the right kind of agency, and then just have an internal person guiding that. A lot of companies, they can't afford either of those scenarios but they can't afford to bring anybody in-house, either smaller designers or others. So the founder just tries to give guidance to the team that they do have. So that's when all of a sudden you see like somebody in the social media group is like, well, they're pretty good at designing, they make beautiful graphics and stuff that we're using in social. They're really smart. They're a great copywriter. Let's just have them do it. But what happens is that person's trying to do what they're great at and they're really focused on. And this is asking them to stretch a little bit outside of their wheelhouse. The founder, of course, is got to stay focused on the things that they are great at, that they love to do, and that they're, able to really stay focused on and accomplish. And that's not doing that either. So I think there needs to be help. There needs to be somebody. And I think that there's different ways you can go about it. I think the way that I'm working, I'm trying to fill a need for where I see people needing help. I think I'm very excited about what I'm doing right now because I love helping people, helping companies, helping brands. And I like filling the gaps and being the partner to complement their skill set at what they're exceptional at. Because I think I'm no slouch at what I'm doing, and I'm trying to help bring that to them. And what I see is that most of the people, especially in the startup space, they're exhausted. They're stretched too thin. They're dealing with challenges and crises every day in a weird way. And I think that, when you're focusing on just what you're great at and you love to do, you can handle all that stuff. But when you're trying to do that and figure out the side of the brand to something, you don't make great decisions. And so I think that they need to partner with somebody who's fantastic. And I think there's a few different ways to do it. I think there's a lot of people like me out in the world that are really exceptional at this. You have to look around and find them. But when you find somebody that you have a dialogue with and you're like, oh man, I feel like they get me, it's almost like dating. You can date a lot of different people. It's easy to say like, well, this person's single and there's a zillion single people in the world. They should be able to find somebody. It's not easy to find the right person. You have to meet with a bunch of people and figure out who is it that when I talk to them, I'm like, oh, they totally understand me. And I think they get what this company is. And I love the way that they talk and they help me understand things. And we communicate well with each other. Like when you can kind of check those boxes, boom, that's who you find. You partner up with them, you pull the trigger.
Yeah.
And that's what I think is the best way for founders, for executives at startups to be able to guide their brand with the right kind of stuff. That's my opinion about it.
And let's say the founders meet somebody, sparks fly, and they really think, okay, they get the vision, they get what I truly want, and they may be able to translate it. What are some of the tactical outcomes you should look out for? When do you know it's going great? When do you know like it's off track?
Well, there's going to be deliverables that anybody will have in that space. Like, okay, well, you guys don't have really a great tight brand brief yet, or these guidelines are here yet. But I think that the real, when those deliverables start materializing, great. But I think that what happens is that when you start to recognize as a founder or an executive at especially at a startup, any company though, when you start to recognize that by bringing in this partner, you can spot right away when all of a sudden there's a different kind of confidence that the other team members have, and it makes them better at their jobs. That's my whole thing. Is like you bring the right person onto any team, they're not just like, oh, thank God, there's finally somebody here who can do this. There's finally somebody here that can do this, and let these people over here become the superhumans that we already know they are. You've in success, and hopefully founders have built and assembled a pretty great team of people, and that are really good at what they do. You can maximize their output and make them better at what they do, and get all of a sudden people are starting to talk about this company in the same way. They're starting to talk about this brand in the same way. That thing that you talked about, that great word you used earlier, vision, all of a sudden it just becomes this, very clear picture in people's minds. The clearer that becomes, then all of a sudden you wind up seeing a different level of executing at a much higher level. You see success and you see confidence in people on your team. And when that starts happening, you can all of a sudden tired people who are still going to be tired because they're working crazy hours and they're, but they just become better. They become more efficient. They're able to focus more on what they're great at and what they love to do. And all the boats rise.
I guess branding story kind of becomes a vehicle for internal alignment and also drive external validation. And it kind of like brings people together. And before, whatever was in the founder's head is kind of articulated in a way where it's internalized into everybody's head. I guess maybe to shift gears a little bit, there are a lot of companies going through rebranding. There might also be companies, even if they're startups, who might be thinking about rebranding for various reasons. When do you know it's time for you to rebrand?
When you know it's time to rebrand, I think to me there's 7 reasons that companies should rebrand. I like to use the word refresh because rebrand, when people hear that, they just think, oh, it's a tear down. I got to like throw everything out. And the reality is what really is needed is a refresh. And there's a lot of different reasons that something's kind of no longer appropriate. There's the brand, the way you have it is causing some sort of technical difficulty. It's not functioning great out in the world. But really, at the end of the day, it kind of comes down to 2 things that I see 95, if not more, % of the time that are the reasons that you need to rebrand. The first is that whatever you're using across all areas, not just graphic design, but all different areas, it just feels a little stale and it feels dated. Like it's just been too long and you've been kind of hearing and seeing the same thing. And it feels like it's lost that luster that you had when the brand was, doing really well several years earlier, if that's the case. That's the first. The second is that sometimes, and actually it's much more often than you realize, it's important and it's helpful for the management team of a brand or a company to kind of communicate to the world that we're doing things a little bit differently. We're pivoting and changing, or we've added something a little new, and just to signal a different, a little bit something new and unique and different in terms of mindset or approach. That's basically something you want to communicate. That's a great time to be doing a refresh. So that's where and why brands refresh, and the big, huge consumer brands that have been part of our lives for our whole lives and will continue to be for forever. You look at them and they tend to just change things up and refresh every couple of years. It's usually fairly subtle, and they almost follow like trends of what's popular right now, But other brands that are younger, they may still be trying to kind of find their way and really, really get out there and succeed in people's minds. You used that word cool a few minutes ago when you were talking about brands and trying to make sure they're cool. That's just the hardest thing in the world to do. It's hard for us as people. It's especially hard for brands. You can't just like, oh, well, I'm going to try to be cool now, and I'm cool. You can't try to be. If you try to be cool, you're inherently going to fail at being cool.
Yeah.
So it's a delicate balance. It's really hard to figure out how you want to find your voice, and at all times you want to have your thumb on the pulse of what's working and what's not working.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's what brands have to be doing. And if the founder can't do that because, again, they're hyper-focused on running the business, and all the people at the various levels are exhausted and focused on the things that they're focused on, then that's, again, it's why it's helpful to have somebody who can try to see the big picture and focus on those things.
Yeah.
And if you have that, and the person is really good at being able to analyze, articulate, approach something very directly and do it diplomatically, it's about this balance of talking about these are the things I think are working and working really well. This is where we really have some great brand equity and some strengths and things that are working for our brand that people seem to be responding to. And then here are some areas where I think we could be doing better. We're falling down a little bit here.
Yeah.
And when you're able to think clearly and or somebody's doing that thinking clearly and communicating it really nicely to the senior leadership team of any brand or company, then great. That's where you can take that input and that directive, if you will, and utilize that data sometimes, and utilize that to help influence what the next steps are in terms of a brand refreshing.
Yeah. I guess I need your hot take on this because I don't know if you've seen, but I think Amazon, Walmart, Google, they all did a brand, I think a refresh where, I mean, even if you squint your eye, you can't tell the difference. They just like changed the gradients or like made the Amazon logo a little bit longer, maybe. I don't remember what Walmart did. What's your take? Like, were they successful brand refreshes? What were they thinking?
Some of those are, some of them aren't. There's big hits and misses, obviously at various times. I think Walmart did a significant brand refresh several years back that I want to say Lippincott did. It was. I'm trying to think who was the head of the team that oversaw the Walmart refresh, but I thought they did an exceptional job of it when they first did that. In the time since then, of course, they've kind of refreshed a couple little times here. Sometimes those go great, sometimes they don't. It's funny when you hear about Amazon and you're like, okay, you just paid somebody $500,000 to do a brand refresh and you literally extended the width of the smile by this. I mean, I don't know that's what's happened, but like as an example, that's the kind of thing that happens sometimes. You just sort of almost roll your eyes like, wow. But, what I always have admiration for is when somebody's able to do something that's a little bit more drastic than that, but there's just an idea behind it. There's some thinking behind it. Hey, we're refreshing. I mean, sticking with Lippincott, I think it was them that did the refresh of Starbucks that now is many years behind us. But when Starbucks made the decision to remove the word Starbucks coffee from their hero logo and their branding and take that off the way that they are on their signage, their packaging, on everything, the hero logo for the company. That's a bold move. Not one that almost every company wishes they could do. I wish I just had a mark that didn't have our name written on there, because it just, you feel like you're such a badass if you can pull that off. Well, it's not going to work for a startup.
Yeah.
It's only really going to work when you've got a brand that's out there in the world that has got major, mass, has just saturated the market like crazy and is really well accepted. And everybody, they're almost a household name. Then you can drop the logo in, everybody knows what it is. Nike can do it, Puma can do it, Playboy can do it. There's certain ones. Shell gasoline, the gas stations, they did it at one point. Same thing. They had, and it wasn't even all that long ago, probably 10, 15 years ago, I think.
Yeah.
Think of what it costs that company to take every Shell station around America, but they're global, right? Global brand, and take that big square, sign that they put in front of every gas station and completely redo the sign. And the way they redid it is they took the old one down and put the new one up, and the word Shell, the 5-letter word sitting across the bottom, is no longer there. Like, wow, that seems like that's a lot of money to spend.
Yeah.
Just to do. Why would you make a change like that? Because that makes a very strong statement. It's not just like, well, I think it's easier to tell it's a Shell station if it doesn't have the word on there. That's not the reasoning behind it. They did it because they can, and it makes that brand feel smarter, more special, more unique. Starbucks did it, and this was not a company that like really badly needed some new swagger. They were already hands down the way far out in the front, number one in their category, in America at least. But man, did they have more swagger after that refresh and that move. It was a bold move. So these are examples that don't apply very often to many other brands. So I probably shouldn't be talking about just dropping the name. It becomes an associative logo and instead of having the name written there. But that's the kind of boldness that I generally tend to really respect and admire when somebody does something like that. It's got some real thinking behind it and a little bit of risk.
Yeah.
And I think that when companies go to do that, it's a lot better than just like, oh, well, look, drop shadows are really big again. Let's throw a drop shadow behind it. Let's make the letters puffy and rounded and like, oh my God, these trends in design that come, they go. Sure, you can change that up all the time. You kind of need to so that your brand looks the same. But when you have a brand that's like never changed their, kind of hero look and it's just endured the whole way through, that to me is bold also. But they find other ways to do smart and innovative things.
Yeah. What's kind of the, key question somebody should be asking if they are running a B2B business when designing their brand visual language versus someone designing their B2C or D2C business?
Well, I think there's a lot of those are the same questions in a way. And I think that there's some companies obviously that are always going to remain B2B and not so much have to focus on B2B. And they don't need to look like some polished, gorgeous, amazing consumer brand. But I think the brands that are succeeding out there B2C are not necessarily the ones that are getting all dressed up like they're going clubbing in Hollywood on a Saturday night either. You know, you want to basically look like, you want your brand to be a great visual representation and accurate projection of who you are. You know, every company must do this and do it well. I always say that brands are like people. I think they have personalities, and I have friends that are of mine that are peers in my field that I've known for 30 years that love to sit and like debate and argue this with me. They disagree. But I believe that brands are like people. They have personalities, and we as humans respond to other humans' personalities as we engage and interact with them. Like the way I talked before about, you know, deciding like what brands you sort of love and don't and patronize. Like that becomes a very personal connection in success. The brands that succeed are the ones that make you feel something. So I think that the B2B, even whether it's B2B or B2C, these companies, they have to have a great sense of who they are, and they have to create a really engaging version of yourself. So again, I used that metaphor a second ago, like, oh, they don't need to be dressed up like they're going out to a club on Saturday night. But that's the thing, is if you think about you, there's different versions of you that you put out into the world. And for somebody who's never met you before, but they take you in from 50 feet away at various times, they're like, hey, here's 5 different like snapshots of Priya, you know, this is what Priya looks like, but she's just hanging out at home in sweats and like, you know, hair kind of pulled up or whatever, you know, just chilling and taking it easy. There's a different version of you that goes to the beach on a weekend day. There's a different version of you that gets dressed up for a black tie event, you know, or you're going to someone's wedding. There's like different versions of us. It's the same you. It's always the same you, but you have that different way that you present yourselves.
Yeah.
You present yourself. And I think that brands can and need to be aware of that too. How are people perceiving you? How are you coming across? Because you as a person would never want to be like, oh, I want people to think I am boring and kind of not interesting and there's not a lot there. Like, but nobody would think that of you anyway, but you would never want to like aspire to that.
Yeah.
So I think that everything about your brand has to not be that. You don't want to be that person who always comes across as trying too hard either, trying to be cool, right?
Yeah.
So you have to find what that balance is, and it needs to be accurate. You know, a founder of a brand, you know, needs to be very aware of who they are. Don't try to be something they're not, but being aware of who you are, that's self-awareness. It's the most important thing for anyone. I think like I had to one way or another be there for my 2 daughters as they made their way through middle school and then through high school and now going to, you know, college or out of college. Like each and every one of those places, I would find that so often I'd be talking to them about just a sense of self-awareness. Because again, for them, they're the same person, and yet there's so many different versions of themselves that they put out there. And just like everything, there's times you overstep, there's times that you make a mistake this way or that way. Brands do it too. And they have to be comfortable with the fact that they're going to fucking step in shit once in a while, and they just have to figure out what is the right response.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you define brands as people, and everything that you described is very applicable today, especially in the B2B world or D2C. There's a lot of founder-led brands. So founders make it their whole personality to somehow talk only about building this company, and there's like this competition to somehow like show everything about your own life and have that be the acceleration engine for your own company's sales, brand identity, awareness, everything else, right? So everybody in social media is trying to be authentic. And at some point it fails to be authentic. I guess like my question is, at what point do you think when you tie someone's personality very closely to the brand, it can be the founder, do you think that they start holding the brand back and they need to step out?
I think that's a great thing to be mindful of. Again, it's really self-awareness, but that's why a great founder can't just exist entirely in a vacuum. They need to put people around them that help keep them in check at times, help them be the best version of themselves. You know, I think if you look, probably the wrong one to use as an example, but I think that even, Elon Musk and Tesla is a great example of
Yeah.
that. I think for a very long time, we had a vision and an idea of who that company, who that brand was. And a lot of it did come from him.
Yeah.
Now, in the time since then, that has shifted dramatically based on his behavior that became very, very public, and a lot of things that we kind of learned about him. But look, I think that a brand is not just the personality of the founder. They don't translate exactly, and this is where like some of those debates I get into with peers and colleagues like are super fun to talk about and delicious. You could use 100 examples, and every one of them is different. But I think that it's like anything. You have to figure out what are the right attributes of your own personality that you want to infuse here. And with a brand, when you create something, you'll hear founders talk about their company often that like this is my baby, So that's in a way too. And the responsibility of a parent, I'm a parent, the responsibility there is you don't want to make like an exact clone of yourself. Of course not. I want to put a human being out into the world that's going to be their own person and be their own thing. And that is hopefully overcomes some of the challenges that I've had, and it goes beyond what some of my weaknesses are and doesn't have to face those things, or learns from some of the mistakes that I've made. And then also exhibits some of those strengths and traits and great attributes that I may have and my wife has, stuff like that. That's kind of what you do as a parent. And I think as a founder, you're the same. Your responsibility is to figure out what's the best version of this company that it can be, of this brand that it can be. Put that out into the world. You can't just snap your fingers and make it happen. And so again, as a founder, creates a leadership team. Some of them may be people that work directly with them every day in the office, if they're in the office. Others can be mentors or peers that they have, and people that are influential just to them as a person to help that they bounce ideas off of. Others may be consultants that they bring in to give kind of guidance, I can't stand using that word consulting when I talk about what I do, but at the end of the day, that's often what I'm doing is advising. And I tend to be quite good at it because I can take things in and bring just a different perspective and try to see things that other people can't see. But whatever that case is, a founder's responsibility is to sort of tap into all of those things. Great founders, as you know, have some sort of level of connection and understanding of how things are working and what the experience of and thinking of is like of the people that work there at every level of their company. Mm-hmm. With their senior management team, with the middle management that's underneath them, or it depends on how many layers there are. If it's a huge brand or whatever, sometimes there's many, many, many layers. But all the way down to the people that are on the ground and sitting and dealing with every last little conceivable detail, the worker bees. And being able to talk and think about them. That brand is they're just as responsible for that brand, functioning the way that it needs to out in the world. And so it's really helpful for that senior leader to be in touch with all of those things. And then, they collectively are taking in that input and trying again to present the best version of what that brand is then.
Yeah. Taking a slight tangent, you were one of the early beta testers for Photoshop back when that OG software came. A lot has changed since then. We're now in the age of AI where creativity is commoditized, as many say. What was it like back in the day as a designer?
I love that you bring that up because I see luckily, I'm old enough to be the dinosaur that remembers what that time was like in the history of business and of being a creative in the world and trying to figure out how you were going to help and build brands from a creative standpoint. And I say that I feel lucky. I don't feel lucky to be as old as I am all the time, but I think I really benefit from the perspective of experiencing that time. It felt very similar to what we're feeling now. I literally came into the industry and discovered the design profession and then came into it full tilt after falling in love with it at a time when people weren't really designing on computers entirely yet. A lot of designers were still working conventionally. Certainly all the ones that had been around for a long time and that were fairly advanced in their career had become quite successful. They had been working conventionally for a long time. People were just starting to make that transition to working digitally, and it was very similar. You heard a lot of the same kind of comments and talk that we're hearing now. A lot of people like, oh my God, these computers are coming along. They're going to replace us all. And they were very resistant. The same way that a lot of people feel, and naturally are complaining about and experiencing a resistance to AI. So I have a different kind of approach. I don't use AI across all areas of my life. I know that with the things that I do use it for, I think it's a tremendous tool that requires human interaction, at least at this point, to be able to do just incredible things. It's using AI in the right way, I think, can take me, who is quite good at what I do in a lot of respective areas. Even using Photoshop as an example, that's a perfect example. Because, man, I've been using it for a very long time. This isn't what I make a living doing, but man, I can roll up my sleeves when I need to and sit and retouch the heck out of stuff. I do it all the time. I play in Photoshop day and night. I do a lot of artwork in Photoshop that's on a personal basis, but I even jump into projects for clients a lot of times where I'm working with it. But man, what it does in the right way, is it takes me and absolutely amplifies my abilities of what I'm able to do. And that's what the computer did, in the early stages of my, of my career. And I think Photoshop, Adobe in general, Photoshop is a really wonderful and unique product. It's amazing that it has been able to endure this long. There's other products that compete with it now that some of my students who are designers, it used to be that like, well, you use the Adobe Creative Suite and nothing else. But, they use a lot of different alternative applications that do some of the similar things. So I wouldn't say that it necessarily rules the roost the way that it always has. But I think Photoshop is still a wonderful tool. And it's been encouraging and interesting to see how they adapt. But what I also love is the kind of work that you're doing for the people that are out there that say, I think that there's a smarter and better way to do this. And I could actually fill some gaps and push the envelope in ways that some of the more traditional, even the people that are in the space that are like, okay, AI is here, we're going to figure out what to do with it. I'm sure there's some great, amazing creative thinkers at Adobe. I know several people that work at the company. It's an awesome company. But I think that what's exciting is watching other people embrace the possibilities, but also more than that, look at different ways to accomplish something that other people have done in a more traditional fashion.
Yeah. I guess you've been an educator too. So the biggest fears today is like someone in college, they're thinking, oh, what job am I going to land? And I'm curious to hear your take on some of the tactical things and also high-level things about how should they pitch themselves about the usefulness of them being a graphic designer to a company in the age of AI, where I guess at least the narrative is like, oh, we can just have an AI do most of the job. We don't need to hire somebody. What should that young graduate be doing today?
I think the responsibility on the young graduate's part is to understand what design thinking really is and what that means. And before they can even that's not something that is just like a skill you take one class in and learn. It's really being a student of the world and being able to grasp a full understanding. I've teach different classes and I've taught for a very long time, but that's the one thing that always comes through. And I think that probably, I would say, resonates with my students the most, and why I generally hear that I'm a pretty good instructor. I think I'm a little refreshing in that fashion, is that I'm not consumed with telling them this is the way to do branding in my branding class. This is the way that typography must be executed in the type class. I don't even give them rules about you must present this way. And for decades, that has been the case, I think, in a lot of areas of the design profession. There are people that are some of the most exceptional people that teach design in the world that are very successful because of that consistency and that rigor of how they say this is the right way to learn foundationally to work. And then you kind of expand around that. I try to nurture and inspire, creative thinking. What that means is a big picture concept, and design thinking for my students. Mm-hmm. And I try to do it for my work as well. I always see, if you look me up, what you'll see generally now is that when I talk about what I'm doing is I'm trying to help people that are not skilled at design thinking do it better or do it more, or understand what it is, and integrate that into the senior leadership, space at companies and at brands. Because to your point, they maybe don't have that on their team at the extent that they should. They probably don't. Let's just be honest, in most cases. So yeah. I do think that it's not something that's easily necessarily taught, but I think design thinking is what's key to driving AI. Every one of us that's had any kind of experience with AI, whether we've used it to try to do some research for us or write a paper, whatever, everyone who's dabbled in it a little or uses it heavily knows that the key is being able to the better you can really articulate a perfect prompt, that's absolutely going to affect the outcome of what you get back. And if you were to, just like anything, if I have an assignment that I give to 10 students in my class, the same assignment, I'm going to get different results back from each of them. So the same is true of AI. You're going to get different things back based on what people punch in there. Now, if they all write the same sentence, it's going to be the same thing. But the key is that it shouldn't always be the same sentence. The better you are able to, drive the tool itself, the more you're going to be able to get out of it. I actually have a funny anecdote that kind of, to me, illustrates this perfectly. And it's a funny story that a friend communicated to me. He was sitting and having dinner with a very senior level music executive, like one of the biggest that has ever been, and asked this person, "Hey, what do you think about AI?" And the guy was like, I think it's fucking great. And he's like, man, you think it's great? I mean, aren't you worried that it's just going to replace musicians? I mean, I think of all the like, session musicians that are out there in the world, like it's just going to come along and replace so many of them. Don't you think that's the case? And the guy says, hey man, let me tell you a fucking story. In 1975, something like that, this little German company called Korg came out with this electronic box called a drum machine. He said, and I remember distinctly, every one of us in the music industry, there was no legitimate musician that would even fucking touch that thing. Like nobody would go near it. Like no fucking way. Nobody wanted anything to do with that thing. All of us legit musicians. And then one day, this one cat, he picked up that drum machine and he started fucking around with it, right? And this guy was a master musician. He played drums, but he like played guitar, he played piano, he was a composer. This guy was a master of many instruments. He started fucking around with this drum machine. Well, that motherfucker's name was Prince. And I can tell you that within a couple of years of his work that was utilizing that thing came out, man, everybody in the industry wanted to be using drum machines. I think that that in a weird way is like a perfect way of describing what we have in front of us right now. The resistance to it, of course, is there. And the fact that anybody can use it and make something great, sure. Anybody can turn on a drum machine and hit a drum beat and, whatever. You don't have to learn the drums to be able to do it. Yeah. But when you put that in the hands of a master and somebody who already has that level of thinking and that creativity, and that's what the human responsibility is going to be and what that's going to bring to the table and really accelerate things in the world of AI. I feel like I'm already seeing it.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with that because, technology has always evolved over the years. It's not like every single person became a master of the technology. There's always been a few creators, few people who are early adopters, and then by the time it's there for mass adoption, probably people have created patterns for how to best use it. Talking about musicians, I think it's a great segue because I had this question because it looks like you designed the brand for Miles Davis.
I did.
How did that even come about?
Well, to be clear, I wasn't born yet when Miles was doing, one of the most incredible pieces of music he ever did, one of the best albums he ever created, in my opinion, happened to come out the year that I was born. I was a passionate Miles fan growing up. My father had tremendous admiration and love for him and his music, and he had all his work on vinyl, all his great, just records and records and records of it in vinyl. And I luckily inherited those, and I have many of them still to this day. But I loved jazz from an early age. I actually played piano when I was a kid, and as quickly as I was able to, sort of moved into the world of jazz piano. I played in the jazz band in school, and I didn't continue with music on after my career, but my love for it never waned in any way. And I came into contact through a really cool client, a project that I was working on in like the early 2000s. I came into contact with the people that manage Miles's estate. Miles had passed away a few years earlier, but his estate is managed by his family. It's his daughter Cheryl, one of his sons Aaron, his nephew Vincent Wilburn Jr. is a very musician that played with Miles and was very close to him, like a son, absolutely. And they were all just fascinating, really interesting, and just brilliant people, each of them in their own right. And then a very dear friend and colleague who I've worked with for a very long time, who I know and admire greatly, who is a manager for estates like this, for and others as well. But Miles, I think, is probably a huge aspect of his work. His name is Daryl Porter, and I adore all these people and have developed a wonderful relationship with them. But I worked with them for a little while, and they approached me to talk a little bit more about it. I think I was always talking to them about just how passionate I was about the music, and they were always mildly surprised and intrigued when I knew all these details about the recording of this album and when this happened in that phase of Miles's life and this and that. And I approached them at one point because Miles Davis is a the musician, having been gone for a long time, it's a tremendous business. There's countless albums that come out every year. There are new albums of new music, not just like, oh, let's take these 4 songs or this live recording and put it on a thing. There's hundreds of albums already that have been, and there's more coming all the time. There's people that cover his music. There's festivals around the world, more so outside the States even than within it, I believe, that every year, festivals that are just dedicated to him and to his music and his legacy. And so it's a tremendous and amazing business. They do cool products that come out all the time, because doing this sort of partnership between Miles Davis and the legacy of Miles Davis, one of the great creatives, ever, across all genres, is really special. So I talked to them about, the fact that they never had like a hero, logo. If you look at going back through all the years of Miles Davis's logos, like a lot of musicians and music artists, not everybody has a, lips and tongue like the Rolling Stones. But even the Rolling Stones, it's like that doesn't appear on the front of every album.
Yeah.
So every album you go back for Miles Davis, every one of them had different ways that his name was typeset. There wasn't like an icon or an image or anything on there that always was used for that. But going forward, I thought what would be really tremendously valuable to them would be to have something that was almost like, that was a logo and like a seal. So that was this conversation that for me started with them a long time ago, 20 years ago, a little more, I think. And it evolved into them coming and saying like, we would love it if you would work with us on an official logo for Miles. And to say I was flattered, I mean, to this day, I think that is one of the things I'm most proud of. What an incredible project. It was fun, beyond fun to work on it too. I think I barely let anybody else on the team even touch the thing. They helped me with a little bit of research and stuff. I would start working on it after like 7 when everybody left the office. I would crank up the Miles music and I would sit in there and just work, through the night. I did that for a few weeks working on it. It was just such an incredible, I have tremendously fond memories of working on that project. And I will tell you a fun little detail is that next year is the centennial for Miles Davis. It'll be his 100th birthday. And they're going to do some really, really cool and special things that are tied to that centennial, but it's like the 100th anniversary. So I've been chatting with them recently. I'm jumping back in to work with them again. I'm going to do a special a special logo that'll be used to commemorate that 100-year anniversary.
These kind of projects, they're not like other types of design, let's say UI, UX, which involve a lot of iterations, you're testing. Sometimes you just like spray something on the wall and see what works. Whereas this kind of brand identity projects, you are expected to design for making sure there's longevity embedded into it because you just don't have that many opportunities to launch a brand. So what should be your creative mindset if you're a designer stepping into this role? And what are like the top 3 questions you should be asking, especially when you're designing the visual language and putting something on pixels?
That's a great question, and I think doesn't speak to just the role and the responsibility of the designer, but for people who are, business leaders, they have to try to think this way too. And it's harder for them, because they're not used to, they can look at something, they can point at 5 different brands and go, I love these, but they haven't spent their career focusing on what's great and what works and what resonates and what's awesome about those. So I think there's a few things. You always want to set out to create something that is going to have longevity. Now, you're not wrong that when you're making a logo for Miles Davis, that kind of has to last and endure forever. It's not like, oh, let's use this for a couple years and then we'll totally change it up and do something different. Yeah. But you're right. I think that's part of what I love about branding is that there's a responsibility there to create something that's going to have the legs to go the distance and endure. And that, in success, if it's all working well, you're refreshing maybe here or there, but the goal is not to be changing it all the time. If you're talking about an ad campaign or a cool piece of artwork you're gonna use for a little while. Like that's something that kind of comes and goes. But when you're trying to create something that is going to have that sort of longevity, yeah, there's a lot of things that you really have to ask yourself. I think that one of the keys, as silly as it sounds, is simplicity. I think that for something to endure, it can't be overcomplicated. It has to be simple enough that people can take it in and grasp it. I think that being true to who you are and finding something that is a perfect and really wonderful representation that actually has an idea behind it and it captures many of the things, if it somehow supports the things that you have in that brand brief that talk about who we are, why we're this way, what we stand for, who our audience is, being true and not trying to be something we aren't. It needs to support each of those things, but it also needs to do so in almost the simplest way possible. And I think, sorry, just to close, one thought in that regard, my teams are my teams that I work with at work and my students both they're just used to hearing me say this phrase, which I've said so many times, countless times in my career, to the point where they almost like roll their eyes, but they're sort of like, yeah, I think he's right. It's a defining attribute of my work, but I think it's something that helps things be, ultimately endure and be great and have longevity. I'm known to look at things and say, hey guys, there's a lot of things here that are working really great. I love what I'm seeing. Let's talk about what we could take away to make it even stronger.
Yeah, yeah. At what point would you can walk me through an example as well. Do you decide that maybe this is not going the way we want and you want to chop it off instead of like maybe giving it the benefit of doubt?
It's hard to say. I mean, I think that self-awareness, I've been known to beat ideas into the ground that I just in my gut said, I really think this is going to work. And ultimately they didn't. But, I think that I take a lot of pride and ownership in the missteps and the mistakes that I've made. They're as important to me as the victories, I think, in so many ways. And because they help guide better decisions and better things going forward. I'll be stronger, I'll be smarter, I'll be, more focused, refined, and I'll have a better idea of what's not working. You can't figure out what's going to work perfectly if you haven't figured out what's not working. And I remind my clients of that. I did last week working with a couple of people I just adore that are like partners to me that I'm working with on a project right now. That they'll feel discouraged. They're like, oh man, we can't do that. We're not going to do this. We're not going to do that. I'm like, these are great things. As we take things away, as we have stuff that's not working, that just helps us narrow the focus on what is going to be working. So,
yeah. I guess one thing that really came to my mind is a lot of work of brand designers. You probably can only look back to reflect on whether they stood the sands of time. Whereas if you look at designers in other areas like performance marketing or UI UX design, HCI, there's like immediate feedback loops. So two things happen. You know whether the product is working or whatever they are working on is working, so you can evaluate that designer. How would you measure success for a brand designer?
I think that it's a interesting challenge to try to do that. I think that you're going to be able to put it. I think you can utilize those spaces and those tools that you just talked about to read the room a little bit as you go, and help inform some of those decisions. Brands often do, the smart ones do, as they're thinking about making changes. Again, if you're starting from the get-go, you don't have the benefit of, social media there from the outset. You are literally making your decision as best as possible based on the like hypothesis of a bunch of experts, really. Like, well, this is what I think is going to work. Here's why. Everybody talks about it, thinks about it. They shoot it with 1,000 holes and you make a little adjustments accordingly. And then ultimately you get there. But I think that you try to make the best decisions you can based on the experience of the people on that team who have been in this world long enough and seen other brands succeed and fail. I mean, I think that companies and brands that are out there, the good ones at least, they're unique enough that they will stand out. So you always have a degree of risk and of unknown.
Yeah.
And you have to embrace that. But if you can do so and come forward with a really confident voice, and so much of branding is just done by feel.
Yeah.
And that's because for it to succeed, it's got to make somebody feel something when they look at it. But that means that the gut feeling, if we're relying on a gut feeling to happen out there in the world with consumers, then it's inherently necessary for the gut feeling to be part of the process of the people making it.
Yeah.
Again,
Yeah.
at every level. And so I think for those people that are tied to this brand, that really understand this brand, that are doing the work and in the trenches of bringing whatever that product or experience or service or it is to market, having a good sense of what their gut feeling is, that's sometimes the way that you're guiding those decisions of knowing what's right and wrong. And I think the thing that for the founders and the people on the business side at all levels who are listening to this to think about is that it's one thing to look at work that a branding team or that a design team or somebody's putting in front of you and say, well, I like this one the best, or I don't like that. That's one thing. What's much more valuable is when you can say, I like this one, and here's what I love about it. Here's what I like about it. Or this one's not working for me, and I think if I have to put a finger on why it's not working, it's this and this and this.
Yeah.
That's going to be what helps that brand design team make the best decisions. Being really clear and direct about what they're seeing, what's working, and what's not working. And a lot of times it's the gut.
Yeah.
It's also subjective. You ask 20 people on a team.
Yeah.
There's some people that are going to be like, well, I fucking hate red, so and all these are out, or I can't stand stripes, or who knows?
Yeah.
Or I don't like the way that this was phrased in this, aspect of the brand strategy. So it's a balance. My teams, there's one more thought that just came to me, so I should bring it up. My teams that I've worked on, I think every team I've ever worked on, they get so fucking frustrated when there is a lot of decision makers or there's a lot of people giving input. They can't stand that. Designers can't stand it. People, honestly, in any area of a business are like, listen, how many fucking people are going to come in and give their opinion here? Like, obviously, the less, the better, probably. But at the same time, I've tried to help people understand, and my teams understand, that they shouldn't be intimidated by all that feedback. It doesn't mean that there's 30 people making the decision.
Yeah.
You are going to be ultimately making a recommendation to the people that are the ultimate decision makers. So frankly, I don't give a fuck. Like, let as many people come in and weigh in on it as possible. Yeah. My job is to gather all that input, process it, see if it influences some of the decisions that I make, the recommendations that I make, and then pass that along to whoever the ultimate decision maker is.
Yeah.
And then that's the last part of that is for the person in my role, whoever that is, to be able to go back to those people and say, listen, I know you gave me your opinion and you really disliked this one direction, but that happens to be the direction we're going in. Or we did an iteration, we're going forward with an iteration that's not quite in that direction, but it's similar, very close to something that you had come and articulated to us that you didn't like that.
Yeah.
But I want you to understand why we made that decision. And I also want you to know that we couldn't have got here without your input.
Yeah.
Because there are people, especially high-level executives, when you ask their opinion and then you wind up going a different way, they're fucking pissed. They're like, what did you even ask me for if you were just going to ignore me? Well, the reality is I did not ignore you. We did not ignore you. We took what you had into consideration and we waited. And there's no way I'm going to make everybody here happy because there's a lot of different opinions. This is subjective stuff we're working on. But actually, what you told us was really helpful. It helped us adjust and pivot what we did land on to get to here. I know it may not look like that to you. You went with something, but it did. So I think that again is a skill set of somebody. That's something you want to look for in a team that you're able to work with, that they can manage a lot of personalities and a lot of input, be able to process that in a healthy way, come back. And then if they're not going to be the ones, if they're having that conversation, I was an executive at Apple, I would have to go back and have that conversation with people.
Yeah.
It's the same at ABC and the Disney company with every big client. I'll go back and have that conversation. I'm never intimidated or afraid to do it.
Yeah.
I don't, march in and tell them exactly how to do their job. I like to give my opinion and tell them what I think is working and not working, and then they can take that and run with it in the way that they see fit.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I guess, there's so many questions to talk about, but something that I want to get your take on to wrap this conversation up is that one of the simulations in my head is, at least, if AI can shape-shift content and mutate it in any different format according to the consumer, then its collective identity of a brand might cease to exist. A lot of it is about like how do you cater to this person and what slice of a brand you can show it to that person. That's just like one view of the future that I was thinking about. I'm very curious about what is your take on where marketing, visual communication, and brand identity will move towards in the next 5 years.
Well, I think that AI is absolutely going to be, it's going to be very valuable in that space. But I think it's also, just speaking plainly, I think it's also going to be not invaluable. That's this sort of the same as saying something's very valuable. It's going to be not valuable at times too. And I think it's just going to depend on the team that's behind it. Like I said, there have to be people behind it that understand what the goal is and help guide it in the right way. It's just like the design that we see out there in the world now at any given time. There's some really brilliant and wonderful stuff that's out there. There's also a lot of shit that's out there too, just to be plain about it. And I think that that's what's going to happen with AI as well. There are places where it's going to be like just somebody's going through the motions. They don't know really how to have that real conversation with AI or guide it in the right kind of way. They're going to take the first answer that gets thrown to the first thing that gets thrown to them, put it out into the world without a second thought, and it might not be exactly on point. But for the people that can really utilize it, again, I think that AI has the ability to take a person and make them like a superhuman version of themselves. Especially again when team members are tired, they're still there, they're still present and engaged and able to do that really, really great and important thinking, but they're so fucking tired. It's like just there's stuff that you miss.
Yeah.
And utilizing AI in the right way, I'll come back and go, okay, well, here's this. I think as we pivot and take this brand and put it over in this space, you could say this, or that. A lot of times people are going to look at that and go, oh man, this is awesome. There's a couple of things in there that I'm so tired. I don't think I would have thought of. And I kind of like that one, but let's take it and reshape that. Let's continue with the thinking that we're going on, the plan that we're going on, but pivot a little bit and accommodate that. It's going to help guide and influence some of the thing you're doing. It's not always just the answer. Sometimes it will be, but a lot of times it's just not.
Yeah.
The people that will cut corners and they're going to make it be the end, that'll be that, and it'll sometimes feel a little, sort of shallow or vapid or off-brand or whatever. But when done the right way and with the right kind of tool, the tool that can help, be a partner to a human mind that's really the person there, but the passion and the excitement and the gut feelings, then yeah, it can be a fantastic tool. So I think we're going to see, silly as this sounds, it's kind of probably sounds like an easy answer, but still my prediction. I think you're going to see a lot more really brilliant and kind of progressive thinking that was influenced by AI.
Yeah.
And put things pushing the envelope in really wonderful ways. I think you're also going to see a lot more just like shit and crap out in the world that was just, the kind of stuff now that in whatever area you're in, somebody looks at it and says like, oh yeah, it looks like it was made by AI. There's stuff like that exists. It was made by a not particularly, envelope pushing engine. And there was certainly not a person behind it that was like really working it through all the different, paces that it could go to get to be something great.
Yeah.
So that's what I think. You're going to see a lot of both.
Yeah. There's definitely a lot of AI slop, but I completely agree that you really need a human behind to make it shine. Thanks so much, Pash. It was so wonderful talking to you.
You're welcome.
I appreciate
This is a
all
great
the time
conversation.
given. Yeah.